Now, if we go back and take a second look at that astrological symbol for Capricornus, remember it's a hybrid, 1 part goat and 1 part fish. And we know what the goat can be connected to. But as far as that lower half, that fish tail, remember one of the earliest religious symbols was the Ichthys, which was literally a fish. And the name Ichthys is actually the Greek word for fish. Sometimes it's actually referred to as the sign of the fish. And there's this whole mystery behind the origins of this thing. Nobody seems to know where it originally came from. But eventually, somewhere around the end of the 1st century, the early Christians adopted this symbol from somewhere and started to use it as a secret symbol to let other Christians know that they were also a Christian. Because, during that time period, you had Christians that were being persecuted by the Roman Empire. So instead of coming out and admitting that they were a Christian in public and risk being killed, they would draw this fish symbol in the dirt or the sand and then quickly brush it away. And it was like an easy way to identify yourself as a Christian because all you had to do was draw those 2 lines. And they took that Greek word for fish, Ichthys, and basically turned it into an acronym or a sort of code word. So whenever one of them would say the word fish, what they'd actually be saying was Jesus. And the symbol eventually started to catch on. And by the 4th century, it was widespread all over the place, leading into today where you see it in front of church buildings and on the back of people's cars. You pretty much see it everywhere now. But again, they say that the origin of this symbol is a mystery. The early Christians adopted it from somewhere, but they have no clue where this thing originally came from. But it seems like a recurring theme in all of these ancient texts that the first physical thing in existence is always water. And then out of that water, we get the very first gods. It's something you constantly see in ancient mythology. And some of the oldest written history that we know of comes out of Mesopotamia or the Middle East, Iraq, Iran, Syria, all around that region. And when you look into the ancient mythology of Mesopotamia, you're going to come across these beings called the Apkallu. And the Apkallu are these 7 demigods. So basically the offspring of the gods. And in the mythology, after the first human beings are placed on the earth, they kind of have a hard time understanding what the gods want them to do. So the gods send the Apkallu to teach human beings everything. How to read, how to write, how to farm, science, mathematics, everything. And also to teach them about the gods and how the gods created the world. And when the Apkallu come to the earth, they come from out of the ocean. They literally walk out of the ocean onto dry land. And the very first group of Apkallu that come to the earth are these human men wearing the carcass of a fish. They're literally described as human beings who have the carcass of a fish draped over the top of them, wearing these fish almost like a cloak, with the fish head covering the top of their head and the rest of the fish draped over their back, wearing these fish just like somebody would wear a robe. And they were looked at as the teachers of mankind, these wise men or sages. And more Apkallu would keep showing up. And based off of the mythology, these Apkallu are the ones who taught the people in each one of the ancient civilizations from the past. And there's artifacts all over different parts of the Middle East depicting the Apkallu, from Iran to Lebanon, Syria. There's artifacts all over Western Asia. A lot of times they'll be in these ancient abandoned cities that are pretty much nothing but ruins. And in the middle of all of that, you'll have one of these Apkallu artifacts that survived all the destruction to the city still standing. But you also have the artifacts that have been excavated and moved to different museums. But they're almost always portrayed as these human men with long beards wearing these fish from head to toe, almost completely wrapped in this fish skin. They almost look like mermaids or mermen with that half man, half fish appearance. But it's a little bit more realistic because you got an actual human being wearing the skin of a fish. And they say that in Mesopotamia, people would actually take the small figurines of the Apkallu and bury them underneath the foundations of buildings. That's where they found a lot of them when they excavated, because people thought that these images of the Apkallu would protect them from evil spirits. And they'd usually set them out in sets of 7, because when the Apkallu showed up, they showed up in a group of 7. And in the mythology, after teaching mankind, the Apkallu stay on the earth for a long time before finally descending back into the water. In one of the myths, one of the Apkallu actually ascends up to heaven. But eventually, according to the myth, they all leave the earth. But they left what looks like this major impact on that ancient Mesopotamian culture with all these artifacts and all this mythology. Now, if we take a look at the Roman Catholic Church, the Pope, cardinals, and bishops wear something called a mitre. And there is some conflict on the origins of the mitre and what it's actually supposed to mean. But the most widely accepted explanation is that it was pulled directly from Acts chapter 2 in the Bible. And this is basically like the moment when the disciples are given the power directly from God to preach to every nation, no matter what language. And when the Holy Spirit enters the room, it looks like two tongues of fire or two flames. And in the story, those flames come down and sit on each one of the disciples. And so the idea is that those 2 points on the mitre represent those 2 flames. Now, again, this isn't the official explanation. It's just the most widely accepted. And it makes sense because every single world leader, every president, every dictator of every single country, all make a visit to the Vatican and meet with the Pope, no matter what language they speak, no matter what religion. Every single world leader visits the Vatican and meets with the Pope. So that symbology of having the power to reach every nation appointed by God makes a lot of sense. It's almost like you can see that playing out in plain sight. But that's just one aspect. If you take the Pope wearing that mitre and then take that image of the Apkallu and place them together side by side and make a comparison, the mitre looks almost identical to that fish head. That open top of the mitre basically looks like the mouth of a fish. Even those 2 tails hanging down the back of the mitre, they call them lappets. They look really similar to those scales, or the body of that fish going down the back of the Apkallu. And even when you look into where the lappets, those 2 tails on the back, come from, again, the origins are apparently unknown. They have no clue where they originated from or what they mean. But the resemblance to the Apkallu is crazy. It's pretty hard to ignore. Now, when they wear the mitre, they usually wear it during ceremonial occasions. So during seasons like Advent, Lent, and different processions within the church. Now, in the Vatican in Rome, which is essentially the headquarters of the Roman Catholic Church, it's worn on a lot of occasions, but specifically during Holy Mass, where they venerate the patron saints. And of course, you've got so many different forms of the patron saints all over the world. They look different depending on where you go. But inside of the Vatican in Rome, the depiction of the patron Saint Peter is black, a very dark black tone. And as one of the rituals of the Mass, the Pope, wearing the mitre along with the bishops, bows down to that statue of Saint Peter. And then the Pope and the Archbishop walk up and kiss the foot of Saint Peter. And this is at the very end of the Mass, by the way. This is what closes out the Mass. And this particular Mass is called the Feast of the Chair of Saint Peter, obviously because that statue of Saint Peter is sitting on that throne. And again, there's quite a few patron saints, but the head church in the Vatican in Rome is actually named St. Peter's Basilica. The entire church is actually named after this patron saint. So that already kind of gives you an idea of just how important this figure is to the Roman Catholic Church. But also every single pope is required to wear a ring on their finger. It's called the ring of the fisherman. And again, every single pope is required to wear this ring. Every time a new pope is elected, they actually have one of these rings custom made for that particular pope. And the ring itself is engraved with an image of St. Peter. And if you notice on the ring, St. Peter is depicted with the halo above his head. And with the robe and the crown removed, you can see that that statue in the Vatican also has a permanent halo, literally a ring hovering over the head of this patron saint. Now, remember, this is all located in Rome, controlled by the Roman Catholic Church. And remember, also in Rome, we had the Roman Empire, an empire that seemed to be obsessed with this god Saturn, with Saturnalia and all the Greek mythology, literally dedicating an entire festival to this god. They seem to be closely tied to this god, Saturn. And of course, we know Saturn is the one planet in our solar system with the largest visible halo circling around it. So you got to wonder, is this patron saint depiction of St. Peter just a continuation of that ancient Roman worship of Saturn? And we've seen the image of Shani and now St. Peter, and clearly they're both black. And the term Apkallu can actually be broken down into a compound, into two words, into the word Ap and into the word Kallu. And in Sanskrit, which is an ancient Indian language that is supposed to go back at least 4,000 years, the word Ap translates to the word water. Ap literally means water in Sanskrit. And in Hindi, which is the official language in India, the term Kali means black. And you can actually see this with the Hindu goddess Kali, because her name literally translates to she who is black in Sanskrit. And Kali is just the feminine form of the word Kala. And what's interesting is that Kali is looked at as the goddess of time, doomsday, and death. Those same exact traits that we see given to the planet Saturn. But Kali and Kala both translate to the word black. And within the same family, you have the word Kallu, which in India is actually seen as a derogatory term against black people. It's pretty much like using the N-word with the ER on the end. Actually, just recently, there was a West Indies cricket player who came out claiming racism against his own teammates because they were constantly calling him Kallu. They actually called him Kallu so much that it became his nickname among the team. And this went on for years. And it wasn't until recent where he found out that that was considered a racist term. And, he went on to publicly call out his teammates on it. But more than likely, it's the same exact case as every other racist term used against dark-skinned people, where the word originally started out meaning dark or black. And then over the span of history, it got morphed into this racist derogatory word. But just with the way it's used now, you can easily see that it fits in the same exact category as Kali and Kala. So again, you've got the word Ap, meaning water, and then you've got the word Kallu, which is referring to black people. And when you take those two terms, that compound, and you put it together, you get Apkallu, black people from the water.